Long ago, in a sunlit village surrounded by wide rivers and golden savanna grass, there lived a young woman named Adisa. She was known for her beauty, but even more for her heart. Her laughter carried like the melody of drums during a festival, and her kindness was spoken of in every compound. She was raised by her grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, a wise old woman who never forgot to say, "A marriage is not just the joining of two bodies, it is the joining of two souls. For better, for worse, the bond must endure." Adisa grew up listening to these words, and she believed them deeply. In her eyes, love was not something to abandon when storms came. It was something to strengthen, like a calabash patched with resin until it shines again. One market day, Adisa met a tall, strong man named Oba. He was a farmer, his skin darkened by the sun, his hands rough from the soil, but his eyes, those eyes held warmth. Oba was a man who knew how to coax yam vines to stretch higher and how to make maize grow fat in the field. He wasn't wealthy, but he was hard-working, and in the village, that was worth more than gold. Their love grew quickly. The evenings found them sitting under the great baobab tree, sharing roasted ground nuts and stories. He told her of his dreams of building a home near the riverbank where the soil was rich and fish plentiful. She told him of her desire to raise children with strong values, to keep alive the proverbs and songs of their people. When Oba asked for her hand, Adisa's family accepted with joy. The wedding preparations began, and with them came the rhythms of African culture. Women pounded yam in large mortars, their pestles rising and falling like the beat of drums. Young men fetched firewood and built the clay ovens. The elders gathered kola nuts and palm wine, for no union could be sealed without them. On the day of the wedding, the village square was alive. Drummers beat the talking drum, calling out the names of ancestors. The air smelled of pepper soup, roasted goat, and sweet plantains. Adisa wore a wrapper of indigo cloth, patterned with white cowries, her head tied high with a jewel that framed her glowing face. Around her wrists jingled brass bangles gifted by her grandmother. Oba arrived with his people, bearing gifts, yams stacked high, baskets of kola nuts, palm oil in gourds, and even a goat tethered with rope. The elders examined everything carefully, nodding in approval. The marriage ceremony was not just about words, it was about symbols. The eldest elder took palm wine, sipped it, and handed the calabash first to Oba, who drank and then passed it to Adisa. She lifted it to her lips, and the crowd cheered. Sharing the drink was more than tradition. It meant, what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. The women ululated, the drums grew louder, and the young boys leaped in acrobatic dances. Even the griot, the village storyteller, sang a song. Marriage is a path walked by two, sometimes smooth, sometimes with stones, but hand in hand, you will reach the end. That night, as the moon rose and the stars burned like diamonds, Adisa whispered to herself, "I will walk this path. For better, for worse, I will not turn away." She believed it with all her heart. What she did not know was that life, like the river, bends and turns in ways one cannot always see ahead. The first months of marriage tasted like ripe mango, sweet, sticky, and bright. Adisa woke before the sun, tied her wrapper tight, and swept the compound with a broom of palm fronds. She cooked yam porridge with ugwu leaves, and when Oba stepped out from the small clay house they had patched together, she greeted him with water in a calabash and a smile that made a man walk straighter. They worked side by side, planting cassava cuttings, staking yam tendrils, and humming to the rhythm of distant pestles. Then the sky changed its mind. The elders said the clouds had lost their way. The harmattan came early, and the wind carried fine dust that settled on everything, roof, skin, and even the heart. Rains were late, then thin, The yam mounds split like cracked feet. The river shrank back as if offended, and fishing nets came up light. Chickens lay fewer eggs. The goats kicked their water basins. What used to be a morning of work became days of labor with little to show. At first, Adisa and Oba laughed it off. "The sky cannot be stingy forever," Oba said, slapping dust from his trousers. Adisa answered with a proverb from Mama Ifeoma. "A stubborn cloud still brings rain when it remembers its duty." They tightened their belts, sold a small goat, and bought extra Gary to carry them. But drought has a way of testing a marriage. The market women were sharp that season, their tongues sharper. When Adisa brought smoked fish, small, thin, and shy of their former size, buyers pressed them between fingers and shook heads. "Sister, this fish is like a broomstick," one said. Another whispered, "The new bride has brought bad luck," not noticing how Adisa's hands trembled as she wrapped the fish in dry leaves. Oba, too, grew anxious. He borrowed a little money from his cousin to hire extra hands for the farm, hoping to dig more ridges before the faint rains. The new hands ate more than they harvested, and the cousin asked for his money back with interest. At night, Oba lay awake, staring at the ceiling. When Adisa placed a hand on his chest, he sometimes turned away and pretended to sleep. One evening, after a day of choking dust, an argument crackled like dry firewood. "You gave away too much palm oil at your sister's naming," Oba said, voice strained. "We need to count every drop." Adisa folded her arms, holding tight to her temper. "Your sister's child is our child. A naming needs oil and song. If we starve the rituals, will the spirits bless us?" Oba sighed, then shook his head. "Blessing does not put yam on the plate." Silence fell between them, heavy as a rainstorm that refused to break. Adisa felt the sting of his words, yet she remembered the vow she had whispered on their wedding night. For better, for worse. But for worse, she realized, was not a place you entered alone. You must carry each other there. The next morning, while Oba walked to the field, Adisa went to see Baba Adewale, an elder whose compound was known for shade and counsel. He sat on a wooden stool, carving a spoon, his hair white like the belly of a fish. "Daughter," he said without looking up, "the tree that bends with the wind does not break." Adisa knelt, greeting him respectfully. "Baba, the wind is strong. Our house is shaking." He listened as she spoke about the drought, the money owed, the gossip, and the coldness that sometimes crept into Oba's eyes. When she finished, Baba Adewale wiped his knife on a rag. "A marriage is a calabash carried by two," he said. "If one hand lets go, it falls and spills. Do not let go, but also do not let the weight be your own alone. Speak to him without knives in your tongue. Ask what he carries that you have not seen." That evening, Adisa made a simple meal, millet gruel and roasted plantain, then waited for Oba under the baobab. Fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns. When he arrived, dusty and tired, she stood. "Husband," she said softly, "we are like two canoes tied with a single rope. If one pulls too hard, both wobble. What do you carry that I have not seen?" At first he said nothing. Then, slowly, he spoke of fear. Fear of failing her, of losing face before the men who judged a husband by the fullness of his barns. Fear of the cousin whose debt reminded him daily of the drought's bite. He confessed he had considered traveling south for a season to labor in a sawmill, leaving her behind with the field and the gossip. "I felt like a coward," he admitted. Adisa took his hand. "You are not a coward. You are a man with a storm over his head. We will wear one hat. If you go south, we decide together. If you stay, we plan together. Let no plan leave the house without both our footsteps." The next weeks were still hard, but different. They made small, wise changes. Adisa learned fish smoking from an older woman who had a sweet hand with smoke and spice, and her fish grew a reputation in the market for flavor that made buyers forget size. Oba began to craft cassava graters from scrap metal and wood. The men admired his hands and paid fairly. They both swallowed pride and sold 2 more chickens to pay the cousin. Adisa herself counted the money into his palm, meeting his eyes without a tremble. When the sky finally remembered kindness, the first heavy rain came like the drumbeat of salvation. Children ran into it with squeals, and grown men tilted their heads back like thirsty birds. Adisa and Oba stood in their doorway, letting the drops strike their faces. He laughed first, a tear mixing with rain, and she laughed too, relief peeling off her like old bark. But drought leaves marks. It taught them what silence could do to a house and what humility could repair. It made them students of patience. It taught them a proverb they etched into their days. When 2 hands wash each other, both become clean. And yet, as they soon learned, rain does not end every trouble. It only makes the ground soft enough for new footprints. Some welcome, some not. The next trial would not come from the sky. It would rise from the shadows of envy and the bitter tongues that thrive even in seasons of plenty. Abundance returned slowly, like a shy visitor. The yam vines crawled confidently, maize husks fattened, pepper plants dotted the garden with small red tongues. Adisa's smoked fish became a favorite in the market, known for the way the smoke kissed the flesh without strangling it. She added pepper sauce in little gourds and tied them with raffia. Women bought the pair, fish and spice, as if they were twins. Oba's cassava graters brought him steady coin, and he set aside small sums in a calabash hidden beneath their bed mat. Prosperity, however, wakes sleeping jealousy. A man named Kalechi, who sold cloth imported from the coast, began to circle their stall like a hawk. He was smooth in speech and had a way of leaning too close. "Adisa," he would say, folding bright fabric with clever hands, "your fish sells because your smile seasons it. A sauce cannot be this sweet without a secret." When she laughed it off, he spoke louder, letting other ears hear. "If I were Oba, I would lock you in the house so the sun does not steal your shine." Adisa did not like his words, nor the way he looked at her wrists when she counted money. She told Oba in the evening, explaining without extra flavor. Oba's jaw tightened. "I will speak to him," he said. But work and season carried him, and the talk never happened. Weeks later, gossip ripened like a fruit left too long on the branch. Someone whispered that Adisa had been seen near the cloth trader's stall after sundown. Another claimed the trader gifted her a length of ankara in exchange for private seasoning lessons. Though none of it was true, rumors travel faster than truth. Adisa felt the heat on her back as she walked through the market. 2 women who once bought her fish now bought elsewhere. One muttered, "A beautiful pot can be empty." The words landed like stones. Adisa went home in anger that tasted like smoke. "Oba," she said, "I have carried this with patience, but patience is not foolishness. Your silence is oil on their fire. You must help me put it out." Oba looked away, shame crawling up his neck. He had been avoiding confrontation, hoping the market would forget on its own. He knew better now. The next day, he walked to Kalechi's stall with a steady step. "Brother," he began, "your tongue has strayed into my house." Kalechi laughed, adjusting his cap. "A man cannot control the wind." "A man can control his mouth," Oba replied. "If I hear my wife's name on your lips again, I will wash those lips with sand in front of this market." The exchange drew a small crowd. The trader, realizing the public weight of the moment, raised his hands. "I meant no harm," he said. "Words are like goats, they escape sometimes." He apologized, too loudly to be missed. The market heard, and the wind shifted. Those who fed on gossip spat it out quietly. Adisa, watching from a distance with her heart thudding, felt the knot in her chest loosen. That night, she thanked Oba. "You carried the calabash with me," she said. He squeezed her hand. "I should have done so sooner." But jealousy had cousins, misfortune and illness, waiting just beyond the ridge. In the heavy green of mid-season, Oba fell sick. It began with a fever that licked his skin and a pain in his joints that made him hiss when he stood. He worked through it for days, stubborn as a bull, until one morning he collapsed beside the yam mounds. The neighbors carried him home. Adisa wiped his face with cool water and called for Mama Ifeoma, whose hands were old but sure. They brewed herbs, bitter leaves, lemongrass, a squeeze of lime. The fever softened, but did not leave. At night, Oba coughed until the stars seemed to shiver. Worried, Adisa sought Babalawo Niyi, a diviner known for wisdom rather than theatrics. His shrine held cowries, opon ifa, and carved figures that smelled of camwood. She knelt and greeted him. "My husband is falling like a tree with termites at its root," she said. The Babalawo cast the opal chain and watched how it fell. He spoke carefully. "This is not a curse from enemies. This is a battle between body and season. He needs rest, herbs, and time. But he also needs what only a wife can give, the kind of hope that sits by the mat all night." Adisa returned home with medicines and with a fiercer tenderness. She kept the fire low and steady, prepared thin porridge flavored with ginger, sang under her breath while she fanned him. She massaged his legs with shea butter. When debts pushed at their door, she went to the market with brave face and sold more fish. The gourd sauces tied 2 by 2. Some customers, remembering Kalechi's loud apology, returned. Others came because they could smell steadfastness in the smoke. Still, illness drags the spirit. Oba's pride hurt more than his bones. "What kind of man am I," he muttered, "that my wife feeds me like a child?" He snapped at small things, the way the mat wrinkled, the way the soup was too hot. Adisa swallowed her own sharp replies and spoke gently when she could, firmly when she must. "A man who breathes is a man who can rise again," she said. "Do not use your mouth to make your legs weaker." There was a day she broke. It came after a week of thin sleep and long work. A buyer accused her of watering the pepper sauce to stretch it. He had no proof, only suspicion. The insult rubbed across her nerves like sand. She returned home and found Oba complaining that the soup had too much salt. Something inside her snapped. "If you do not like the soup, cook it yourself," she blurted, then covered her mouth with her hand, shocked at herself. Silence hung. Oba's eyes softened. He saw the dark half-moons beneath hers, the way her shoulders drooped. He reached for her hand. "Forgive me," he whispered. "My pain made me forget your pain." Adisa sat beside him, both of them exhausted, and they wept a small, healing weep. After that day, something shifted. Oba began to thank her for small things. He swallowed insults that rose to his tongue. He tried to sit up and sort cassava chips with her, even when it wore him out. Hope put on work clothes and joined them in the house. When his strength finally returned, it did not arrive like a trumpet. It came on quiet feet, one longer walk, one deeper bowl of soup, one day without fever. The first time Oba went outside and felt the sun without dizziness, he raised his face like a plant. "I thought I would not see this yellow again," he said. Adisa laughed and cried at the same time. The village remembered. Those who had gossiped were now the ones greeting them effusively at the market, as if they had never doubted. Adisa learned another lesson. The same mouth that spreads your fall will sing your rise. Do not build your house on either song. As harvest approached, they planned a small Thanksgiving, not to show off, but to mark survival. Palm wine was poured in honor of ancestors, cola nuts were shared, children sang. Mama Ifeoma told a simple truth. Love is not noise. It is the quiet that remains when the noise ends. Yet one more test, subtle, important, waited on the path. The moment when, for worse, tempts a woman to swallow harm. Adisa would learn to draw a line in red earth and teach others where wisdom ends and self-loss begins. In the season of abundance, dangers can hide in soft places. One of Oba's distant uncles, Uncle Tayo, came to live nearby after a quarrel with his own household. He was older, with a cane and a pride that walked taller than his legs. Because he was kin, he visited often, expecting food and respect to fall into his lap like ripe pawpaw. Adisa welcomed him with courtesy. She gave him soup and listened to his stories. But Uncle Tayo had ideas about wives that smelled like old smoke. When Oba was away selling graters, the uncle barked orders at Adisa as if she were a servant. "Where is my cola? Where is my stool? Do you not know how to greet a man?" Once, when she returned late from the market, he scolded her in the compound, voice raised for neighbors to hear. "A good wife stays inside. The market will spoil your head," his words cut. Adisa kept her posture, but inside, anger sharpened teeth. That evening, she told Oba everything, every insult, every demand. She spoke not with vinegar, but with clarity. "Husband, my vow was for better, for worse. With you," she said, "it was not to be ground like pepper by another man's foot. Respect is not a soup I can cook alone. Will you help me season this house with it?" Oba listened, shame and protectiveness rising together. He had been slow before and had learned the cost. The next morning, he invited Uncle Tayo to sit. "Uncle," he said, "your gray hair deserves honor. But my wife is not your staff. In this house, we pour respect in both cups. If your tongue cannot carry kindness, carry your legs elsewhere." The uncle bristled, sputtered about traditions, and lifted his cane as if to punctuate the air. Oba did not flinch. "Tradition is not a stick to beat women," he said. "It is a mat to seat families." The old man left in a storm of grumbles, but the storm stayed outside the door. Adisa felt her spine straighten. She had drawn the red line with Oba's hand beside hers. The story of that boundary traveled. Younger wives came quietly to ask Adisa how she had done it without breaking the pot of peace. She told them, "A vow is not a chain, it is a bridge. Do not let anyone set fire to it in the name of, for worse, speak. Seek wise ears. Ask your husband to carry the calabash with you." She also added the hard truth. If a house becomes knives and fists, you must step out and call the elders. For better, for worse, is not for wounds. Life is given so we can keep it. Years walked on soft feet. Adisa and Oba's home grew in layers. Twin sons who ran like goats over low walls, a daughter who sang to the chickens, a dog that chose them one rainy day and never left. They planted an orange tree at the edge of their compound and watched it grow from stick to shade. Every year, when it flowered, the whole compound smelled like a promise. They did not forget what the drought taught or what illness underlined. They saved a little from every sale. They took turns resting on market days. They hosted a small circle of friends every new moon. No show, just laughter, palm wine, and stories that stitched people together. When quarrels came, as quarrels do, they had a rule. No sleeping with stones in the mouth. They would talk, even if talking meant sitting silent together until soft words found them. One market season, a young couple, Sade and Kunle, came seeking counsel. They stood in the doorway, fingers laced so tight it looked like they were holding each other from falling. They spoke of money troubles, of a mother-in-law's sharp tongue, of the way hunger turns lovers into strangers. Adisa listened with eyes that remembered. She served them warm millet drink and kept her voice simple. "Listen," she said. "Our road was not a straight line either. We staggered, we argued, We almost became enemies with our own thoughts, but we learned small things that saved us. Share plans before they leave the house. Refuse to let silence sit like a guest. Protect each other in public. Correct each other in private. And always, always keep a mat for joy, even if it is thin. Oba added, and do not be ashamed to call elders who bring peace, not gossip. We are not trees. We can lean on each other. Sade and Kunle left with lighter steps. Adisa watched them go and felt a quiet gratitude that their scars could be maps for others. On the 10th year of their marriage, they hosted a feast under the orange tree. Not grand, but full of heart. Drummers came, old and young. The griot sang of harvests that followed droughts, of women whose hands stitched homes, of men who learned that strength is not loud. Children danced in circles. Mama Ifeoma poured a small libation to honor ancestors and living teachers. She put her weathered hand on Adisa's head and then on Oba's. You did not let the wind teach you lies, she said. You learned the truth it tried to hide. That love is work in working clothes. When the night ripened, Adisa stood to speak. She was not one for many speeches, but a story wanted to be told. When I said, for better, for worse, I thought it was a poem, she began, smiling. I learned it is a craft. For better is easy, sun on the doorway, laughter that needs no invitation. For worse is where the craft shows, when rain forgets the road, when markets hiss, when illness tests the bed, when relatives forget their place, when our own tongues sharpen like knives. In those times, we do not worship suffering. We practice wisdom. We do not swallow harm. We draw lines and call witnesses. We do not carry alone. We insist on two hands. That is the promise. The compound hummed with agreement. Someone shouted, "Tell them!" Laughter rolled like a drum line. Later, as stars salted the sky, Adisa and Oba sat beneath their orange tree. The children slept inside, curled like commas in a book still being written. Crickets stitched the night with sound. Oba turned to his wife. Thank you for not letting go of the calabash, he said. Adisa leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you for holding the other handle. They did not live a life without hardship after that. No one does. But they had learned to build ladders from each trial. When rain was late again, they rationed and remembered hope. When the market stirred with a new gossip, they faced it as one body. When age began to put small aches in their bones, they mocked it with gentle jokes and extra pillows. And always, when a young person in the village asked what marriage means, Adisa would smile and answer with words that fit in one breath but filled many days. Marriage is not a place to prove how much pain you can take. It is a garden you tend together, pulling weeds, watering roots, building a fence against harm, and sharing fruit. For better, for worse, yes, but with wisdom, with boundaries, with two hands on one calabash. If you're interested in more cultural folktales and stories, be sure to check out our videos and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.